Coming up on Mountain News at 5:30, today marked a big step toward the possible legalization of medical marijuana in Kentucky. We take a look at where the legislation stands in Frankfort.
And the Department of Justice launches an investigation into the failure of the Silicon Valley Bank. What steps is the federal government taking to try and prevent another collapse?
And things remain chilly throughout the mountains for now. Details on some nicer weather ahead coming up as Mountain News at 5:30 starts now.
Dedicated to southern and eastern Kentucky, this is WYMT Mountain News at 5:30.
Good evening, I'm Steve Hensley.
And I'm Olivia Calfee. Using medical marijuana to legally treat certain ailments and conditions in Kentucky took a big step forward today.
The bill was heard and then passed in a Senate committee. It's never been heard in that chamber before because of lack of support. As WYMT's Phil Pendleton explains, proponents of legalizing the drug for medicinal purposes believe a law is much closer to becoming a reality.
Eric Crawford, I'm from Mason County.
For 10 years, he's been pushing for a law to make legal a drug he says he needs, but knows he could be labeled a criminal for using.
I don't want to be high. I just want to feel better.
Crawford was injured in a crash 29 years ago and says marijuana relaxes his muscle spasms and eases his constant pain.
Surely there's nobody on this committee that thinks I'd be better off taking opioids.
The bill passed 8-3 in committee. It is the first time it's gotten through this stage of the Senate. Representative Jason Nemes's bill got through the House in 2 previous sessions and says today was an emotional victory.
It's a lot. I mean, I talked to thousands of people, and I know it's going to help them. People just want to be better. They want to feel better, and that's what this is going to do.
This bill, if made law, would not allow you to smoke marijuana, but it would allow a prescription-type treatment for such ailments as cancer, PTSD, epilepsy, and chronic pain. But not everyone is convinced now is the time to do this. Donald Douglas is a doctor, and he was among the 3 who voted no.
Over time, we see increased anxiety, increased panic attacks, and even paranoid psychosis.
But one staunch opponents say now is the time to push this through.
I grew up in the 1980s during a very strong anti-drug culture. If you're a pot smoker and you're looking for me to help get the camel's nose under the tent so you can smoke your pot legally in Kentucky, I'm not your guy.
Mayor's yes vote resulted in applause and cheering from the packed crowd to see its outcome. In Frankfort, Phil Pendleton, WYMT Mountain News.
The bill is expected to be called in the full Senate later this week and would then have 2 days to pass the House. Governor Beshear has said in the past he supports the issue.
Widespread frost and essentially a hard freeze possible throughout the night tonight. It's been a cold day today, and we will continue to see cold weather out there throughout the night tonight. Here's a look outside. You see plenty of cloud cover through downtown Hazard. Temperatures have at least rebounded a little bit in parts of the region, but not everywhere. You see we're starting to break out into some sunshine at Buffalo Mountain here in Perry County. Temperatures in the low to mid 30s. In many spots we're close to the 40s as we head into the Cumberland Valley. We will continue to see what's left of a few snow showers try to push out. Not a lot of that's reaching the ground, but it is something we'll watch. We're mostly dry otherwise, and we will continue to dry out tonight into the low 20s for an overnight low with that hard freeze likely. Details on when we see a return to some warmth and then rainy conditions in a few minutes, guys.
Thank you, Evan. The Pentagon confirmed a Russian aircraft and American drone collided over the Black Sea this morning. Pentagon spokesperson General Patrick Ryder told reporters the unmanned drone was over international waters when a Russian aircraft conducted unsafe and unprofessional intercept of the drone. Ryder said intercepts are not uncommon, but insisted the way this particular incident took place was not the norm.
One of the Russian Su-27 aircraft struck the propeller of the MQ-9, causing U.S. forces to have to bring the MQ-9 down in international waters. Several times before the collision, the Su-27s dumped fuel on and flew in front of the MQ-9 in a reckless and unprofessional manner. This incident demonstrates a lack of competence in addition to being unsafe and unprofessional.
In a statement from the commander of the U.S. Air Force's Europe, General James Hecker said, quote, "This unsafe and unprofessional act by the Russians nearly caused both aircrafts to crash." Now that the federal government has stepped in to save customers of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, experts say the next step is investigating to find out why the banks collapsed in the first place.
CBS's Nicole D'Antonio has more on that from Capitol Hill.
CBS has confirmed the Department of Justice has launched an investigation into the failure of Silicon Valley Bank. President Biden hinted at possible investigations Monday while announcing the government is guaranteeing customers will not lose their money.
There are important questions of how these banks got into the circumstance in the first place. We must get the full accounting of what happened and why those responsible can be held accountable. In my administration, no one is above the law.
The Washington Post and New York Times are reporting the DOJ is looking into the actions of senior Silicon Valley Bank executives. SVB's CEO issued a letter to customers Tuesday urging them to not only leave their deposits in the bank, but to reinvest the money they took out over the last week. The criminal investigation is one thing, but there's political fallout to the bank failure as well. And Republicans on Capitol Hill are pointing their fingers squarely at President Biden. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy tweeted that Biden's reckless spending caused record inflation and rapid interest rate hikes that broke family budgets and banks too.
Prior to the bank collapse from last week, people were anticipating a 50 basis point hike again. I think they're now anticipating more of a 25 basis point hike, and some people are actually saying by the end of the year you might start to see some interest rate cuts.
New numbers out Tuesday showed inflation is still an issue, but the February numbers are lower than they were January. Nicole D'Antonio, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell testified last week that the Fed would likely raise interest rates higher than anticipated based off the January inflation numbers being so high. Some analysts are predicting the Fed will still raise rates when they meet again, but it won't be as high based off the new numbers released today.
Senator Elizabeth Warren is calling on Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell to rescue himself from the review of the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. SVB fell after chaos sparked by high interest rates led to a bank run on Thursday, with the bank's depositors pulling out $42 billion. The Federal Reserve said yesterday it launched a review into the supervision and regulation of SVB. The bank's failure raises questions about whether regulators provided enough oversight or should have seen the collapse coming.
Scandal-plagued House Representative George Santos is likely running for re-election in 2024. The New York congressman filed paperwork with federal regulators today. The statement of candidacy signifies a formal intent to run, but it does not mean he has to. Regulators gave Santos a Tuesday deadline after he crossed a fundraising threshold that forces a declaration. Santos faces federal, local, and congressional investigations into his financial and campaign activities after he was caught in multiple lies about his resume and background.
The Environmental Protection Agency is proposing new regulations to make drinking water safer. EPA leaders announced today that under the proposed regulations, water systems would have to monitor for 6 specific forever chemicals. Those are synthetic chemicals that linger in the environment and the human body and can cause serious health problems. Officials say the proposal would prevent thousands of deaths due to exposure to these chemicals. When the time comes, President Joe Biden says he will deliver the eulogy for former President Jimmy Carter. At a fundraiser in California, the president said Carter asked him to do it. Former President Carter began receiving hospice care at his home in Georgia last month, according to the Carter Center. At 98 years old, he is the oldest living U.S. president in history. Carter has kept a low profile in recent years due to health scares and the coronavirus pandemic. President Biden last saw Carter during a visit to his Georgia home in 2021. We will be right back.